We have Mars in Capricorn. Mars will be in Capricorn for the next month and a half. And this is a powerful time. The transit of Mars in general speaks to where there's a lot of stimulation. It's sort of the cutting edge of conscious movement. It's where we're making choice and responding consciously to the playing field of life to instigate and further our own evolutionary growth. So wherever we have Mars in transit speaks to where there's activity, where there's forward movement. Mars in Capricorn right now for the next month and a half till the end of March, it's powerful because it's moving over this cluster party of planets that are currently in Capricorn. We have the South Node, Pallas Athene right now, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. Saturn will enter Aquarius at the very end of March, just as Mars is moving over Pluto. So there's a lot of activity, and I want to unravel this a little bit and speak to this transit. One of the issues with Mars in general is the idea of reactivity, right? So there's a lot of stimulation, and with that stimulation, our nervous system is excited, our mind is excited, our emotion is excited, our instinctual drives are excited. And without a lot of consciousness, without taking the time to really become self-aware and understand what's helpful, what's useful, what's productive, what works, we might have a tendency with Mars to be reactive. And this reactivity then sort of has the consequence of instigating chaos and disorder and lots of movement. Mars often brings that, right? And it's not good to say it brings that because I always really want to point everyone in the language that I use to a self-referential way of understanding astrology, that Mars doesn't bring anything. Mars reflects a function within us and our tendency to react. And when we react with Mars, what happens is we forego our own agency and we basically give our consciousness to secondary status where environmental circumstances become primary and who we are is determined according to what's happening. What we learn with Mars is to cultivate a sense of self-leadership, to become self-conscious and reflective on our path in life so we can act, we can exemplify leadership and clarity and decisiveness of direction. And at the same time, appreciate that we're always venturing into an unknown territory. Each choice, each action, if we're really living on the cutting edge, there's a sense of this is completely new. And the function of Mars really represents that. Completely new. I've never been here before. And we can appreciate that everything that we do sets in motion a whole reality of consequence. And as we become more aware of our soul path and what's really important to us, we claim that leadership to make choices in alignment with what we are really trying to create here. And so we become less reactive, we become more intelligent, more thoughtful. You know, it's like standing in front of the proverbial battlefield and just really considering how to respond to the circumstances. The challenge with Mars in Capricorn is that there can often be a tendency here to become violently and aggressively reactive to anything we perceive within or without as wrong. What happens in Capricorn is consciousness forms a very crystallized and often two-dimensional worldview where life is seen in a black and white kind of way. And you can think of this in the way that a child might learn the ways of the world. So you watch some movies or your parents are explaining something to you and you might learn, well, there are bad people and good people. I've often seen kids, ask the question, is it a bad person or a good person? And it just being able to classify life in these very two-dimensional ways, it creates some sense of order and clarity. And hopefully we grow out of that. But so often we're told, bad. You're bad if you do this. It is wrong to do that. It is wrong to act in this way. And we condition a whole reality within ourselves that crystallizes human experience, fixes it, sets it in stone, and takes away the fluidity of the learning, of the journey, of the discovery, and it stops everything in motion. And so often it becomes, what you are doing is wrong. What you did to me is wrong. Now, this is especially true if we're hurt, right? If someone acted in ways that was hurtful to us and they weren't conscious, they weren't caring to us, and we've been hurt, let's say you've been hurt numerous times, we might say, I will never get in a relationship with someone who will treat me that way again. And it seems very reasonable. And I often see that. I think I saw a post on Facebook that said something like, if someone doesn't love you entirely for all of you, then leave. And I read that and I thought, is anyone so enlightened and refined and self-aware that they will only always love you unconditionally for all that you are, no matter what? No. People are infallible. They are imperfect. We're learning, we're working on ourselves, we're cultivating more grace and forgiveness and growing. And when we get into relationships, it's a wide open template for us to cultivate more love, more compassion, more presence, more care, more sensitivity. But if we've been hurt, a very common reaction to feeling hurt is to close our hearts and put up this big boundary, this big never. Right? I will never do this again. I will never, be with someone that will not compliment me. I will never eat animals. I will never be in a monogamous, or I will never be in a polyamorous relationship. Now, this doesn't mean that your particular style or worldview or what works for you is wrong. But what I want to invite is this reflection on the energy that you might hold around any of these nevers. Because these nevers can hold this charge to it. And I want to give the example of relationships and diet. These are two great examples, right? We have a lot of people who eat meat, a lot of people that are vegans and self-identify in these categories that hold very strongly to these worldviews, to these constructs. And what I find people often do is it becomes a defensive stance. Right? This is the right way to be for your health, for the environment, for the sake of animals. This is the right way to be. And what it does is it creates this box, this very two-dimensional and limited container that limits the scope and the complexity of human experience, and says that this is the absolute right way to be. It's a moral absolutist way of living. I see people who are convinced that you need to eat animals to be healthy, and all kinds of perspectives and worldviews. And that itself is another, absolutist worldview. And once we decide what is right, what is better, our hearts close up. And that's qualitatively different than feeling what's right for you right now, right? This is what's right for me. I don't know many people that say, I will never do this, while also vibrating this fluid, open, loving space in their heart. We only get defensive about our stances in life, about our nevers, about our absoluteness, when we feel we need to protect and defend something that actually is really tender and vulnerable. If we didn't feel we needed to defend or protect, then we wouldn't be so absolutist about our view. It would just be the realization of what's true for us. Same thing in relationship. I know so many examples of people that have experienced all the various forms of relationship, right? I tried polyamory and it was hurt and my heart was broken, and I'm never going to do that again. And again, that's fine. All these paths that we walk are fine, but just to become self-aware, what is the energy of that, right? Underneath that, never, underneath that wall is hurt. And by giving attention to the moral judgment, even if it's not projected outwards, like, maybe it's good for you, but I'm never going to do that again, right? It's still this judgment of wrongness. And by focusing attention towards that, it actually cuts us off from the gem, from that delicate, precious space within us that is actually calling for so much more care and attention and love. And the opposite is true. People that have done monogamous relationships. I was married for 30 years and it was stifling and I couldn't express myself. And I don't believe that anyone should ever, settle with one person. It's not natural for the human species and all that kind of stuff. But what's underneath that? This calling to be loved for who you are. So whenever we fall into these absolutist mentalities, whether it's just being applied to ourselves or outward, there's really something so much simpler and delicate and precious underneath. And I want to be clear. Sometimes this is what we need to do, right? Sometimes we need to be angry and defensive and protective. And if that's the path that we're called to walk it. There's value in that. There's importance to that. If that is the most accessible way to self-care, to take care of ourselves. But when this becomes a destination, we can live a whole lifetime holding on to the hurt and never allow ourselves to blossom. We can live a whole lifetime defended and protected and stuck and rigid. And before we know it, without even realizing it, we become this archetypal, criminology. There's a word that I'm looking for. Old person that is sort of like bitter and resentful and set in their ways. Maybe the kind of archetype that we think we are not, we become that and we age with that. In fact, it actually ages us. It takes us, it takes our health away, it takes our vitality away. So with Mars in Capricorn, this is a potential. It really reflects within us any areas that maybe have become overly rigid. And Mars instigating a lot of stimulation, a lot of activity. And so there can be a lot of triggers right now, a lot of dynamics, in particular, Mars moving to the south node of the moon. So this can be bringing up conditioning factors where we have sort of set our minds in place. We said, this is where I'm going to be. This is my stance. Think about how this can look in a relationship, whether you're in an intimate partnership or not, just your relationships. If you hold yourself frozen, there's a certain part of you that you'll never share. There's a certain place of shame and embarrassment that you just won't let others see. I will never fart in public. If I ever fart and someone knows, it's like the worst thing in the world. And so just imagine you're going to be holding on to. There's a part of yourself that is wrong. And so can anyone ever fully love you? Can you really let anyone fully into your heart when you have decided already that there's a part of you that is not lovable? What happens with Capricorn? We often project externally criticism and judgment coming from the outside, weighing us down. People aren't going to like me, people aren't going to accept me, or a memory of, once I farted in class and everyone laughed at me. And so we become overly focused on what others think. This fear of approval, this fear of rejection, concern with approval is so strong in Capricorn that we fail to recognize that it's actually an outpicturing of the inner judge. It's all coming from inside of ourselves. And as we learn to source our authority from within, we recognize that It's our own self-acceptance. It's our own self-trust. That is the most important thing. So with Mars moving to the south node, over the next week or so, it's going to be moving to it and then passing it. It's really bringing up a lot of these places within us. And the invitation here is not to be reactive. It can be very stimulating, but the beautiful part about this is we're all alive. We know what this is like. We've been doing this for a while. Okay, so this is not like a hard time. It's not like a specifically cataclysmic, but it could be. But it's like, it's just Mars, movement, activity, energy, right? So whatever's coming up in the playing field, a lot's emerging. And Capricorn asks for patience. Capricorn asks us to know ourselves. So before we react, before we jump to a conclusion, the gift of Capricorn is it always says you have time. It always says that there's space for you. Because time and space is for your using. That's what we learn in Capricorn. When we don't claim that agency, we perceive time and space as an enemy, as having authority and a weight over us. But we can take our time and unravel, like, oh, I notice I'm reactive. I notice I'm judging. I notice I'm getting tense right now. And come back to, what's my intention here? What am I wanting to build? What's really important to me? What does it look like right now for me to take responsibility for what I care most about? And basically, we have that choice of either living in the past with our convictions and our rigidity, or to live in the present moment and to invest ourselves in what we're actually cultivating and what's really important to us. So often on this path of life, we spend so much time wanting something better, someone better, someplace better, hoping for when things will change. But seldom do we really, really appreciate the freedom and the right and the mandate actually that we have to take responsibility for that right here and now. To know that this power is in our hands means also accepting that we're not victims. So as Mars moves through Capricorn, it's going to be moving over Jupiter and then Pluto. It's really bringing a lot of growth, a lot of awareness to consider that during this whole phase, it's moving towards Pluto. So Mars is balsamic towards Pluto. It's completing a cycle. And so it's just unearthing maybe a lot of unconscious dynamics within us. Pluto speaks to the unconscious impulses within the soul. And so we are drawn by unresolved emotion. We're going to feel triggers. We don't necessarily know why we're triggered. Or we're going to feel strong attractions or strong obsessions, and we don't necessarily know why. Whereas Mars, we act on it. We do something about it. But this Pluto dynamic is like something impelling us. And until we understand that we're basically, with Pluto, seeking to find more of our power within by forming relationship with that which is outside, we're going to be constantly dancing with these external objects. And that's not wrong. It's what we do. But we have to be able to come back to ourselves. Otherwise, we get hooked. So Mars moving towards Pluto, I think, is really bringing up one important dynamic, and that's one of addiction. Because when you put Mars and Pluto in Capricorn, it really speaks to how consciousness can become so used to, so familiar with its patterns of outsourcing its power on the outside and reacting to stimulation in very instinctive and thoughtless ways. I feel a certain way, I go and drink. I feel a certain way, I act this way in relationship, I become controlling. I do all these things because I'm feeling nervous and insecure. I learned a really cool phrase that I didn't know. In Hebrew, the word for addiction is liot machor, which is to be sold. And I think this is such a beautiful Capricorn concept. To be sold. The conditions of the world, the conditions of time and space, the stuff of this worldly experience, we're sold to that. We allow it to possess us. We give our agency over to it. And so this transit really invites the possibility to unravel a deeper layer of psychological self-knowledge, taking the time, Capricorn, and the space, Capricorn, to connect with our impulses, create healthy practices to move energy, do the shadow work, appreciate the content that's manifesting in our sphere right now, and just appreciate that life is offering each one of us the reflections that we need. We don't really have to go seek it out, right? The lessons are right here, who you're with, where you're at, what's present for you. And there's a great opportunity to bring energy back to self and become more clear, more committed, more confident in the agency and the abilities that we each have to condition a healthy life, to use time and space for our purposes. And where we are sold, this is being sold to substance, sold to behaviors, sold to ways of thinking. This particular time period will certainly give us the opportunity to see it more clearly. This whole journey ends with Saturn entering Aquarius. It's just a powerful time, such an interesting time. So I think the next couple months, and definitely moving into April and beyond, it's sort of a tide changing kind of phase. Um, so yeah, much love and many blessings to all of us during this time. And I posted a little thing on this on Facebook, and I actually got a couple questions. And I thought it'd be fun to maybe just answer these questions right here. I think that'd be a cool thing to do in general. So one person asked, what are the virtues and gifts of Mars and Cap? What can Mars offer as we move out of rigid right-wrong views? So I would really say the virtues and the gifts of Mars and Capricorn is the ability to act. Think of Mars as like a soldier, right? Its purpose is to act, follow commands, do. You have a directive, Mars does that. Capricorn is a general. Capricorn is making well thought out decisions. And so I think the wisdom and the virtue here is training our ability to act with consciousness, with clarity, taking time, really trusting ourselves that we have what it takes to grow and to learn, which means recognizing how young we are in that sense. We don't maybe know the answer yet. We don't have the strategy. And so to give ourselves more space to learn, to be influenced, to grow into greater maturity. I think that's the challenge, because Mars is sort of the archetype of the youth, just in general associated with youthfulness and young mentality. And then Capricorn is the elder. You put those two together, it's oftentimes a tension, where there's a sense of struggling with the conditions of the world or trying to push the boundaries. But I think this can be a time where we can all grow into a deeper spiritual maturation. The other question is, so you mean to stay tender and humble and witness our rigid patterns? Not necessarily stay tender and humble, but maybe notice when we're not humble and tender. I think because Capricorn is conditioning, right? And so we become self-aware after the fact of having become already conditioned in certain ways. We grew up with it, we are entrained. When we condition certain behaviors and patterns, we weren't thinking, I'm going to make myself rigid now. We've become rigid, and then we become aware of it. So Capricorn really relates to the deconditioning process via introspection. So yeah, becoming aware of ourselves, witnessing these rigid patterns, and through that, it's developing the skill set and the maturity to relate to ourselves with respect to the tenderness. Remember that Cancer is the polarity to Capricorn. And so the Cancer polarity is the emotional body. It's just like the the non-rational human creature biological aspect of us feeling, having emotions. We all need to be touched. We all need to feel loved and invited at home and safe. So we unravel where we've closed ourselves off, where we've cut ourselves from the tenderness. And I think it's a matter of, just like when a child is crying, like, this is a great example, I see this often with kids, you know, she hurt me, and like the child wants this other person to be punished, right? Like, I'm gonna go to the adult because I was hurt and I want this other person to be hurt. But why? Like, what's that really about? It's because you were hurt, and so something was violated, and so bringing attention to what was violated, and so we can speak to the person that hurt the kid, and teach them that's not right, that's not appropriate, without it being shameful. And we can relate to the person that was hurt in a way where we're bringing our attention to the fact that they feel violated, so they can feel seen. When Michelle read me a quote today, it was something like, whenever we are seen, we are loved, something like that. Like, when we are really seeing one another, that's where we can really feel loved.